Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining the PathLAKE conference. I'm David Snead. I'm the director of PathLAKE, one of 5 centres of excellence established across the UK to exploit AI in digital pathology and radiology. PathLAKE's role is to deliver and facilitate delivery of high-impact artificial intelligence technology to support pathology delivery in today's healthcare. These tools will increase efficiency of pathology reporting and improve patient outcomes through advanced diagnostic and selection of patients for personalised medicine. So on behalf of my co-hosts, I'm delighted to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar, which we've entitled Bench to Bedside. I have a programme of talks focused on how we implement AI in digital pathology and routine practice from experts across the globe to share their experience and give their advice with us. So I encourage you to pose any questions you have in the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of the screen. We will collate these and use these in the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. But finally, I'd like to let you know that today's event is being recorded and will be available once it's been edited on the PathLAKE website. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And it is my pleasure to present the first talk of today by Professor David Snead, who is a professor in the University of Warwick and a consultant pathologist in the Warwick and the Coventry and the Warwickshire University hospitals. David is an international expert in the field of digital pathology, and he is a founder director of PathLAKE. And I was privileged to work with David in 4 grants of more than £35 million. So thank you, David, for this effort. And David actually is leading the field of digital pathology in the UK and well known internationally. So the first talk, David will speak about PathLAKE and generation of AI tools for cellular pathology. Here you are, David.
Thank you.
Can you share your...
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for that very kind introduction. Have my slides come across okay? So,
yes, we can see it. Yes, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. So my title of my talk is PathLAKE and the generation of AI tools for cellular pathology. First of all, PathLAKE stands for Pathology Image Data Lake for Analytics, Knowledge and Education. It was established in 2019 with funding from Innovate UK as part of the Industrial Strategy Fund, and I have no conflicts of interest to declare. The ambitions of PathLAKE were essentially threefold. One was to digitize cellular pathology. The second was to develop exemplar projects of benefit to pathologists and patients in the future. And the third part was, in doing so, to create a data lake that allowed for the development of AI technologies by ourselves and co-partners and interested parties in academia and commercial interests across the world. The reason for wanting to do this is simplified on this slide, which shows the increasing and escalating workload that cellular pathology laboratories face, certainly across the UK, and I would imagine other countries similarly. This is data from our own lab in Coventry over the previous 10 years, from 2008 to 2018. On the left-hand side, we've seen a gradual increase in the proportion of requests coming in per month over that time, roughly between about 2% a year. And on the right-hand side, we've seen a doubling of the slide volume that's been created as a result of those requests. And that really summarizes the key point with cellular pathology at the moment is we are required to provide ever more detailed data reports from the samples that we receive. And this is translated into increased slide volumes that we need to deal with. And all of these slides, of course, at the moment are manually read by, usually by consultant pathologists. So PathLAKE foresaw that digital pathology was an important part of the solution to this escalating problem of demand. And we've seen a great escalation in the degree of digitization of cellular pathology over the past year for obvious reasons. And we do expect that digitization itself will deliver an efficiency gain of around about 10 to 12%. I think some estimates are slightly more ambitious at around 20%, but it really depends on your local makeup, exactly how much you will get from this. But without doubt, the biggest gain we're likely to see going forward is the use of artificial intelligence, where we expect various tools to gain an efficiency between 20 and 40% as we go forward. So in future, pathologists will still be looking at H&E slide, of course, for the greater part of their workload, but underpinning it will be analytics that are derived from that pixel data analysis that AI can perform in the background for us. To enable this to happen and to make this happen, PathLAKE's one of its primary objectives, as mentioned, was the formation of a data lake, and this is collated from cases from each of the institutions that are part of PathLAKE, feeding whole slide image data into the data lake, along, of course, with the clinical metadata that's so important to make sense of those slides. We house this data in a secure area at the University of Warwick Computer Server Hall, where it can be accessed by parties given approval. To gain approval to the data lake, one applies to our access committee, which is staffed by representatives of each of the NHS organisations contributing data, and functions a bit like a tissue bank or ethics committee to vet the validity of proposals coming in. And those which are approved are then given access to the data that's required for the studies they wish to perform. So we don't give the data away, we allow access in, and we allow researchers to load their code on our analytics engine, conduct the experiments, and export the results. And by doing so, we are able to make available vast amounts of whole slide image data for research, which would otherwise not really be feasible or possible. So oversight of how the data lake looks when you get in there, you can, this is one of our own projects, of course, so we've got pathologists listed on the talk at the end here that were taking part in this project, looking at slides which are visible on the viewer, and can make annotations to those slides as shown in the bottom right hand corner for the research that's required. So this is just one example of how the data lake would look to pathologists coming in to use it. When we began this project some years ago now, we set ourselves a number of goals we hoped to complete by the project's conclusion, which was initially scheduled to be the end of this year. In fact, as events have unfolded, our project has been extended to end of September next year. So we have a little bit longer to hit these milestones, but I thought I would give an update of where we are with most of those major milestones that we set ourselves. Starting, of course, with the digitization of the sites involved, the 5 sites involved. That's been completed now. We've created the data lake, as I mentioned. We have massively increased the number of slides we expected to put in there. We're now up to over 300,000 cases that have gone into the data lake. Admittedly, they're not all immediately available for research, but as we go forward with the cleaning of the metadata and curating those data sets, they will become available for research in the future. We have done considerable amounts of work on the development of our algorithm, which I'll speak about in a moment. And proof of concept has been delivered for each of the use cases which we set ourselves initially. And we're really into the phase of improving that data and developing partnerships with commercial bodies to take that work further forward into to create products which can then be regulated and used on the market. For a number of reasons, our commercial partner Philips at the start of the project was planning to introduce a number of AI projects. These have been sidelined and will not come forward now due to a change in direction of Philips. But we are able to report that we have made good progress on development of relationships with companies that take some of this technology on, and we'll be looking at it again in the future. We have published a number of papers in high impact journals, and we regularly present to international meetings and organizations. And we have developed alliances with our colleagues in the AI centres across the rest of England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Furthermore, one of the reasons why some of those benchmarks haven't quite been hit is we have focused quite a lot on the development of PathLAKE Plus. This was a scale up of the original project, aiming to bring digital pathology to a wider group of hospitals. And this has been extraordinarily successful, with a number of sites coming on board in addition to those sites which were initially funded through the grant income. So we now have 8 major groups of hospitals undergoing digitization as part of this program. At the end of that, PathLAKE will be responsible for providing digital pathology to around 40% of the population across England. Each of these sites will be contributing data to the data lake, so our data lake is set to grow considerably as these sites come on board, and that's all to the good for future research and development. An important part of this particular part of the project, PathLAKE Plus, is the delivery of artificial intelligence, both in the form of solutions which PathLAKE ourselves has started to create. We will be looking to do that, but also in the short term by the procurement of commercially available solutions which are on the market right now and which we'll be looking to put into practice across these sites. We hope to be able to do so in such a way that we provide near equal access to this AI for all of these sites taking part. And furthermore, the use cases and the procurement framework which has been established for development for the procurement of this AI, we expect to be transferable across all of these sites and indeed across to other sites in the NHS should they wish to do likewise, allowing other sites to make use of the AI which we procured, and I think that will further spread the advantages which can be offered through this process. We aim to publish a specification for this AI this autumn, so we are working through that piece of work right now, and we will be looking to deliver completion of that procurement early in next year. As far as PathLAKE is concerned, the original project we established, we set ourselves goals for delivering AI in a number of areas. First of all, in the form of diagnostic efficiency through colon and prostate screening tools to detect, in the case of colon biopsies, to be able to automate the reporting of normal biopsies so that we could remove normal colonoscopic rectal biopsies from the workload, allowing pathologists time to concentrate on the cases which contain disease, and also use the algorithm to triage those cases on a basis of urgency depending on the disease which has been detected. In prostate, we were looking to develop tools which could pre-order immunohistochemistry and provide the pathologist at the time reporting with the sections and stains which are required to report the case. And this avoids the delay of pathologists having to go back and re-examine cases once they've requested the immunohistochemistry. We've been looking at tools in prognostic AI, particularly in breast cancer, to predict which patients are likely to progress and therefore enable us to personalize delivery of chemotherapy to those patients at particularly high risk of progression after the disease has been initially excised. And in the final sector, the prediction, we've been looking at colon cancer and the use of immunomarkers to help predict which cases of colon cancer will respond to which kind of therapy in the future. These algorithms which we've been developing have required, to some extent, the provision of annotation And I wanted to use this talk to explain a little bit about what it's been like as pathologists providing this ground truth data for our computational pathology colleagues to make use of in the computer engineering suite. You know what? This is not easy to do. These tools are quite cumbersome and difficult to use, and pathologists need to become adept at providing this data efficiently and rapidly if it's to be of any use to researchers. So we have developed a number of tools which have been quite helpful in delivering this. One of which has been the construction of an annotation dictionary where we define agreed markers for different objects of interest, whether that's individual cell types or morphological features such as invasive carcinoma, as is shown in this particular slide here, or areas of acute inflammation, whatever it might be that's of interest. It's important that everyone, of course, uses the same annotation tool to make those judgments. So the creation of this dictionary takes some time, and it's important that you do take time to do this properly in order to ensure that everything you need annotating can be annotated accurately and as efficiently as possible. The purpose, of course, of these annotations is to communicate the precise coordinates of the object of interest that's on the whole slide image to the pixel data that's then going to be analysed by the analytics computer engines. And this is done by means of enormous spreadsheets which produce CSV or JSON files of the particular coordinates which have been annotated by the pathologists as they go forward. Now, when you do this, it's important that in a particular case like PathLAKE, where we're starting to make this data available to other researchers to use, and where we're starting to import data from other projects which have been used as part of PathLAKE, that all of this is interoperable and that data that's been analysed in one project can be used by researchers looking at an alternative project. And that requires a degree of communication and agreement between different research units and a means, more importantly, of translating differences as and when they've occurred so that they can be catered for as well. However careful you are, you're not going to get this completely right the first time around. It's important to be able to go back and realign things which end up being called slightly differently by different people. Finally, want to say about these annotations, it's important that you repeat them with different pathologists. So in our case for PathLAKE, each of these annotations is produced in triplicate by three different pathologists. We have pathologists working in teams of 3, therefore looking at each of the slides and annotating them accordingly. And that gives you a level of agreement between particular objects of interest which have been annotated. So, for example, as shown on this slide here, on the left-hand side, you can see a high-power view of a piece of invasive colorectal carcinoma, which has been annotated with the red blobs representing the tumour cells and the remaining cells annotated by different coloured dots. And each of the dots represents one individual pathologist's view as to what that particular cell is. In this case, this is cell level annotation. All of the cells in the patch that we've highlighted need to be labelled by each of the pathologists. So we get 3 versions of the truth as to what each of those cells is. And you can see that there is very good agreement between pathologists as to what represents carcinoma cells, and slightly less good agreement about what all the other cells are in the background. And this is the nature of the beast with digital pathology images, even with today's technology, which is pretty good. When you get up to higher resolution images, it is difficult to know precisely what individual cells are in some cases. And we've had rounds of consensus views to agree different marked items of interest where that seemed to be particularly important to the algorithm, that we try and get a consensus view to what a particular object is. But it's important that you get some degree of measurement of agreement. And likewise, when it comes to measuring regions of interest on the right-hand side, in this case, obviously areas of invasive carcinoma and desmoplastic stroma between the tumour islands, it's interesting to see what levels of agreement there are there between pathologists. Quite good, of course, between the areas of where the tumour actually is and where it ends. Less good about where desmoplastic stroma begins and ends. That's a much more difficult judgment call to make and leads to greater variation. So it gives us an understanding of how difficult it can be sometimes to provide this ground truth data that our computer scientists would want us to. But don't despair, because help is at hand. There are means of automating this entire process. So as it's taken us many hours of time to produce that ground truth for the initial set of slides we've annotated, we are now able to automate this large part of this task by means of deep learning, of course. So this is a computerized annotation rather of the whole slide image of normal colon, showing the boundaries of the glands and the surface epithelium. And you can see how neat and crisp and accurate this is in comparison to manual labeling that would be done by pathologists. And this is developed through rounds of iterative rounds of segmentation, classification, and correction of errors, which requires the input pathologists at various points to identify errors and correct them on the patches which are being examined. But in doing so, you can improve the way the network delivers the boundary definitions to the objects that have been described. And that can lead to a very successful tool which can automate not just the annotation of normal glands, as I've shown, but right down to cell levels. So this is the latest iteration of its cell marking tool, which we've been working on in PathLAKE, which has great accuracy in recognizing different cell types in large bowel mucosa and indeed in submucosa as well. For reasons which escape me, this tool has now become called Lizard, and this is a preprint paper which went out quite recently describing this technology and how it's been developed as part of PathLAKE, and also showing how it agrees with pathology. So we have, from the original ground truth data which we provided in triplicate, we can now see how the automated process compares with how pathologists would call it, and we've shown by this that the level of agreement between computerized generated markings of these cells is no worse, or at least just as good as the agreement between individual pathologists. And it does seem to, as these images show, quite accurately mark out the areas of acute inflammation in these glands and the distinction between glands of underlying stroma and laminar program.
1 minute, David. 1 minute left.
Thank you. 1 minute. Okay, thank you. And finally, then, just to move on to predictive models for breast cancer. This is MAD work on luminal breast cancer, ER-positive, HER2-negative tumors, showing how the L-regulated neural ranking of known risk factors can predict for progression in these patients quite well. So that's looking very promising. And finally, this is how well we're doing with predicting for normal colon. These are our ROC curves for the latest iteration of the detection of normal, with an area under the curve of 0.96 for all abnormals and 0.99 for cancer. As good it seems as pathologists, or in some cases better, as this instance of what was thought to be normal biopsy turned out to have a small focus of hypoplastic polyp, which had clearly been missed by the reporting pathologist, but nevertheless was picked up by our algorithm. So in the interest of time, I shall move straight to the acknowledgements slide and thank all my fellow co-workers, both in PathLAKE and in the Department of Pathology at Coventry and our commercial partners at Philips for the support that they provided with us over the course of this project. Thank you very much.